So the artist can then come along, and through working these visions out, he or she picks up subliminally. The artist, as McLuhan said, the artist's job is to create a counter environment. He picks up on invisible subliminal changes, and then he creates a counter environment that provides new solutions to the technological disequilibrium that has taken place elsewhere. So it may be that our artists might slowly over time adjust our sense ratios, and you can see this happening in the movies. The directors and screenwriters are definitely working out the scenario of the invasion of our collective psyche by the machines. It's being worked out there. It's impossible to predict which way it's going to go. And even if the high media disintegrate, it can still be worked out in the popular media. So it may be the case that 20 years from now, people will say, what was Ebert's book about, in 2011? What was the big deal about then? It's experienced as a trauma then, but nowadays it's, everything is taken for granted. Once everybody has forgotten bookstores, and you get a generation where, they've never had bookstores or record stores or actual physical books, they won't miss them.
And they might even have, well, I guess, I was raised with bookstores and everything too, so it's still strange for me. But I'm guessing maybe even the future generations who are born a decade from now, 2 decades from now, who don't have these stable things that we take for granted, but are still creative and are still artistic, and I don't know, maybe they'll end up coming up with something. But so I guess to lead into the last question, which is sort of what we've been talking about, what do you imagine human societies will be like in the coming years? As the world continues to decentralize, is there any hope of a planetary culture or planetary civilization? And just, I guess, to keep in mind how everything's kind of falling apart and everybody's re-tribalizing, is the practice of loving, like during the axial age, going to become more important? The practice of, I guess, getting along, the way McLuhan said. Either we're all going to not get along with each other, or we're going to learn how to get along with each other. So I don't know. That's the last question.
Well, as it's part of the New Age. One of the main beliefs of the New Age that we're shifting into an age of planetary consciousness, and you get various philosophers in the New Age who will draw scenarios that say that there's this great planetary consciousness, and we're all thinking on the same. We're moving into an epoch now where, we can see the planet and encompass it all, and we're all using the same media to access it. The same people in India are accessing the same internet that you and I can access right now. So we're all on the same plane technologically, but I don't think that's the problem is, I know people want to hear that, and it would be nice to believe that were the case, that we're moving into kind of planetary horizon where, a global spirituality will descend and dawn, and we'll all be united in this giant community. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think the problem is that as globalization takes place, you get a pullback into all these separate individual cultural boxes that have been there. Each one of these cultural boxes, and there are 8 or 9 of them, has been there for thousands of years, and it's ready-made software. You don't have to think about it too much. You just say, I'm a Hindu. This is my tradition. All you have to do is embrace it. And so ever since globalization has been going on, particularly through the 90s, we start seeing borders tightening up. The moment NAFTA went into place, for example, under Clinton, that's when the border states in Arizona and New Mexico became very concerned about tightening the borders and keeping the Mexican immigrants out, even as the trade tariffs were removed to accelerate the process of global free trade. So it's a paradoxical phenomenon. Technology is uniting the planet only on the technological and perhaps the economic plane. Culturally, people are retreating back tighter and tighter into their own ethnic identities. This was what, for example, Samuel Huntington's book, The Clash of Civilizations, was about. He articulated the thesis in that book, sort of countering Fukuyama's End of History, where Fukuyama, who was a student of his, by the way, Fukuyama puts out the idea that, okay, we've all shifted into liberal democracy. We all agree now, and those nations who don't agree inevitably eventually will agree that liberal democracy is the best form of government. They'll all convert. History's over. Well, Huntington said, no, that's not even close to the case. What's happening is that in the colonial world, you had the great nation-state powers, Britain, France, and Germany, carving up huge swaths of the planet. World War I and World War II end that. With World War II, then we move into the Cold War, and we shift into a bipolar system where you're either communist or you're capitalist, or if you don't want to be either one, you're non-aligned, right? So the great system from 1945 to 1989 was bipolar. But now Huntington says what we're facing now is, with ever since the collapse of the Berlin Wall, political, siding in terms of political ideology and taking on that as your cultural identity has given way to shifting back into your cultural identity. So as a result of that, as soon as the Soviet Union collapses and the former Yugoslavia, and the interesting thing about the Balkans is that it's a world where three different civilizations overlapped. You've got Western Christendom, and the Croats were Catholic. They were backed by Germany. Then you have Muslim civilization. The Bosnians were Muslim. They were supported by Turkey. And then in between you have the Serbs, who are backed by Russia. They're Orthodox Christian. You have three different civilizations there that all of a sudden go to war with each other against carving out a new map as soon as communism disappears as an overarching ideology. So that region became destabilized. And so where you're at on the map doesn't so much matter as who you belong to, what ethnic group you are a part of now. So in a sense, we're retribalizing. We're shifting back into, not into nation-state identities anymore, but into civilizational identities. What matters now is whether you are Orthodox Christian or whether you are Western Christian. Whether it's Protestant or Catholic doesn't matter. They're both Western Christian, and they're quite distinct in terms of their ideology from Orthodox Christianity, or whether you're Muslim, or whether you're Latin American, or what it is. Huntington lists about 8 of these different cultural boxes. And so all of this is happening as a direct response of globalization. People don't want to give up their cultures. They're too wonderful to give up. Why do we want to see them disappear? Why would we want a global, planetary, homogenized culture? We're already getting that, this non-world with, unifying the planet on the technological plane with this worldless technology of gas stations and parking lots and shopping malls, which are the same wherever you go. And it's nauseating, to travel and go to another place only to find out that it looks just exactly like where you left. It's ridiculous, and it's so we don't want to give these civilizations up, and nor do I think that we should. But I think that the ethnic identities are going to get tighter and tighter and tighter and put up more and more resistance in direct proportion to how tight the planet becomes on the technological and economic planes in terms of globalization.
So do you think there's any hope that, as things get tighter and tighter, will they be able to learn to get along? Do you think we need, to my knowledge, to what I know about the axial age, there was this kind of revitalization of these new ethics and these new religions. Traveling on the spiral of history, do you think it's possible we might, do you hope for something like that for a new kind of axial age?
Certainly I hope for something like that. Nobody alive, I don't think, would not want that. It would be great. But the reality is very different, I think. And I think what may happen is a sort of another polarization between the first man and the last man. Okay, so Fukuyama says we're in the end of history and the last man. What is the last man? The last man is actually the man as the consumer. He's the guy at the end of history who shows up and he's completely self-satisfied, so satisfied that all his needs have been met, that he has no longer any kind of thymotic urge, and thymos means it's a kind of wrath and anger for, it drives Achilles. He wants respect from Agamemnon, and he's thymotically driven to get it, right? So the last man is no longer thymotically driven. He's not interested in achieving great things. He's not interested in risking his life. He's not interested in saying, I'm willing to do without all of these comforts in order to bring about something new. The last man at the end of history is the shopper, and Fukuyama, contrary to what everybody thinks, is actually paints this last man as a very bleak portrait, actually. The end of history turns out to be not something that he was celebrating, but as something pathetic. The last man is pathetic. But the first man is Hobbes. Hobbes is first man, the Aboriginal man whose life is nasty, brutish, and short. And I think what we may be looking at is a polarization in which the people who get along are the last men. They are the people globally who operate, who control all the world's wealth, and in all the great civilizations, India, China, they're the global elite who control the world's wealth. Those people are going to get along and agree. And what they're going to have to face is the first man, the third world, and other cultures like the societies in West Africa, which are in many cases so anarchic that, as Robert Kaplan points out in The Coming Anarchy, you have to have an armed security guard walk you out of a restaurant into the parking lot to get into your car. That's how bad the situation there is. And let's say that was the Ivory Coast. But so it could come to that. It could come to a polarization between, the people who get along are the last men, and the ones who don't are the have-nots, the first men who have to fight it out for access to diminishing resources. And as both Robert Kaplan and James Lovelock have pointed out, with global warming on top of this is something that too often does not get factored into account. With global warming, we're going to experience massive resource shortages. Water is going to start drying up and disappearing. The coastal zones are going to start disappearing beneath rising sea levels. Glaciers are melting. Once let's say, for example, once the glaciers in the Himalayas melt, no more Ganges River. The Ganges River is gone. So you're going to see lots of refugees displaced by changing environmental circumstances, fighting for access to natural resources against each other, as they do in many cases in Africa to this day. And this is going to spread globally. The populations are going to have to migrate north. In America, for example, James Lovelock points out that the Midwest will turn into a desert. The entire breadbasket, the world of farms, will shift north into Canada. And as the breadbasket desertifies and turns into something that looks like Phoenix, it'll be a gigantic southwestern desert spread all over that zone. The same thing will happen in South America. The Amazon rainforest is disappearing. And the Amazon just dried up for the first time in its history in 2005. The river dried up. They had to actually import water. They had to actually import water to it to fill it back up. So global warming is a fact. It's a reality. It doesn't matter what side of the political coin you're on. It's a reality, and it's something we're going to have to face and deal with, and it's going to put enormous Malthusian pressures on these populations struggling for access to resources, and that's the real challenge that we're going to be looking at over the next 50 to 100 years, is a world riven by natural resource shortage and war and famine, and it's going to be a real struggle.
Seems like we haven't experienced something like this since pre-civilization. At this kind of global catastrophe.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I guess. Well, it's been an hour. So I guess we'll end it there. And thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, Jeremy. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this very much.